This is a fan-generated show. If you would like to support us, please go to jamieglazov.com and also don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel. All your support is greatly appreciated.
Hello, this is the Bruce Bawer Moment, brought to you by the Glazov Gang. The other day, Mary Tyler Moore died. As the obituaries pointed out, she was a feminist icon of the 1970s. The image of this smart, poised, funny, well-mannered, always beautifully turned-out woman making her own way in a male-dominated workplace made a big difference for women of that time. Cut to last week, the Women's March. What picture of feminism did we get? We got Madonna screaming the F word and talking about blowing up the White House. We got Ashley, what's-her-name, an actress whom I vaguely remember seeing in some movie about Cole Porter, reading a demented, hysterical rant that oozed man-hatred. We got millions of ordinary women who were supposedly so shocked and upset and traumatized by a single vulgar statement that Donald Trump made in 2005, and especially by his use of a certain word beginning with P, that can also mean a kitty cat, that they couldn't stop repeating that word themselves, shrieking it, screaming it, writing it on their T-shirts, wearing little pink caps that alluded to it. We got the old commie Angela Davis and the organizer of the protest herself, who turned out to be a full-fledged, Sharia-loving friend of Hamas. That's organized feminism today in a nutshell. But one of the speakers especially caught my attention. I didn't know anything about her until I read an article in the American Spectator by Melissa McKenzie. The speaker's name is Donna Hilton, Hylton, no relation to Paris. She was identified at the march as a criminal justice reform activist, quote-unquote. What they didn't tell us, and it was McKenzie, I think, who first brought this to public attention, is that Hilton is one of a group of women who in 1985 drugged a 62-year-old man, Thomas Vigliarolo, in Elmhurst, Queens, then drove him to a Harlem apartment where they tortured him for 2 or 3 weeks. They beat him, they burned him, they anally raped him with a 3-foot pole, they squeezed his testicles with pliers. When Hilton delivered a ransom note to a friend of this guy, the police were able to track her and her accomplices down, but by then, unfortunately, Vigliarolo was already dead. After I read Mackenzie's article, I Googled Hilton and found her website. It describes her as, quote, a woman's rights activist and a criminal justice reform advocate who speaks publicly about the issues facing incarcerated women and girls and the significant impact that the significant increase in the female prison population is having on families, children, and our communities, close quote. The site also plugs her memoir, which, quote, tells the story of the childhood abuse she endured, the spiral of events that led to her incarceration, and how she learned to live, love, and trust all over again, close quote. Notice how that thumbnail portrait of her life entirely leaves out Vigliarolo and the inhumane, ultimately deadly torture that she subjected him to. Elsewhere on her site, she does mention that offense. She writes, in 1986, I was sentenced to 25 years to life for kidnapping and second-degree murder, and was released in 2012, close quote. Then, once again, she gives us another big-picture perspective on her life. Quote, my lifelong journey is one of many emotional and physical prisons. I went from abused child to rape victim to desperate teen mother to solitary confinement, where the boundary of my world was a 6x10 cinder block room. Again, note how her actual crime and her victim, Mr. Vigliarolo, are entirely erased from the narrative. She goes on, quote, I know and believe in my heart that my prison sentence was a part of a bigger plan. It was a place for me to survive, heal, and find my calling, to help others, close quote. Look at what she's doing there. She's transforming Mr. Vigliarolo, her victim, from a human being whose life she took to a mere instrument in her own life. She then has the audacity to turn herself into a victim, identifying herself with countless other women who, quote, refused to be marginalized, sexualized, abused, silenced, and criminalized, close quote. Look at that. Instead of describing herself as a criminal, a murderer, she refers to herself as having been, quote, criminalized. She is one of innumerable women, she charges, whose, quote, humanity has been taken from them, close quote. This from a woman who took not just somebody's humanity, but his life. But that's just her website. In her speech at the march, she went even further. She started off by mentioning that she had spent 27 years in prison. The crowd gasped. Now, if somebody told me that they had spent 27 years in prison, I'd have immediately asked, well, what did you do to be sentenced to 27 years in prison? The audience didn't seem to be gasping at the thought of what kind of horrendous crime she must have committed. They were gasping, I think, because they found the idea of such a long prison sentence inhumane, barbaric, no matter what the crime. Hilton then told her audience about the resolution that had taken shape in her mind and her heart during her years in prison. No, it wasn't a resolution to try to make up in some way for having tortured and murdered Mr. Vigliarolo. No, it was a resolution to, quote, do all that I could do, close quote, to tell the stories of her fellow inmates. During her speech, Hilton recited her prisoner number several times, presumably to emphasize the dehumanization of the prison experience. She also recited 7 names. No, they didn't include the name of the man she killed. They were the names of 7 other women who, like herself, are or have been imprisoned for long periods of time. She didn't mention their crimes. I Googled the names and found 2 of them. One of them is Judy Clark, a member of the Weather Underground terrorist group, who was convicted in the murder of a guard named Peter Page in the 1981 robbery of a Brinks armored truck in Nyack, New York. The other was Pamela Smart, a woman who killed her husband in 1990. Hilton said, quote, today we march in solidarity to be their voice, close quote. Not the voice of the men who were murdered, the voice of the women who murdered. These were 2 women who killed men, and she represented them as victims of men, just like herself, who had also killed a man. It was sick, it was twisted, and her audience cheered. And that wasn't all. After her speech at the march, she gave an interview to Chinese television, not Taiwan, communist China. In the interview, she went even further than in her speech. She raged about the U.S. prisons that are, quote, crowded with black and brown women, close quote. Asked by her interviewer why there were so many minority women behind bars in the United States, Hilton spat back at her that it was, quote, because of the dehumanization, we are criminalized for our color, close quote. And so there you have it. On her website, in her speech, in her TV interview, she showed no signs of taking responsibility for her crime. On the contrary, she has managed to transform herself from a killer into a victim. And anyway, just parenthetically, here's one little last fact about Hilton. When I Googled her, I also found a story that appeared on the Deadline Hollywood website in November. It appeared that representatives for Hilton were shopping around the story of her life as a potential major motion picture. An actress named Rosario Dawson has already been, or at least at that point had already been tentatively cast to play her. I wouldn't be surprised if all the attention she got at the march helps get this project off the ground. I mean, after all, Hollywood makes movies about communists like Dalton Trumbo and treating them as heroes. Why not her? Of course, the only real reason that Donna Hilton is worth talking about is that the people in charge of that massive, massive march considered her a suitable face for their movement. Now, what does it say about the march, the Women's March, about its values, about its worldview, that the organizers chose this unapologetic murderer to be a featured speaker, and that women attending the march cheered her at the top of their lungs? I mean, okay, you could defend those women by saying, well, they didn't know about her crime, but if you tell me that you've served 27 years in prison, I'm not cheering you until I hear the whole story. But they didn't care what her crime was. They cheered her because they bought into her self-image as victim. But this has something else to notice. Those cheers, when they weren't really happy cheers, they weren't cheerful cheers. They were more like howls. When you think of it, and I've been thinking about this all week, they were like the dying wails of a mighty beast after it's been shot. After all, these women were fierce adherents of the cultural worldview of the Obama era. The pathological obsession with identity groups, victimhood, imaginary grievances, fake rape charges, the demonization of decent people as deplorables, and the depiction of jihadists as innocent victims. They saw Donna Hilton as the very personification of their movement. And they rightly recognized the election of Donald Trump as a potentially fatal blow to their worldview, a blow to the very foundation of their self-images. But anyway, there you have it. The Women's March was the perfect coda to the Obama presidency and the perfect symbol of everything that presidency represented. Was Donna Hilton, an unrepentant murderess, transformed into a hero. Well, that's it for now. Please support the Glazov Gang at jamieglazov.com and make sure that you're subscribed to this Glazov Gang YouTube channel. Bye for now.